right, I welcome you all to another episode of the Cosmic Matrix podcast. Today with your hosts Bernhard Guenther and my partner Laura Matsue. And our very special guest today is Eve Lorgen. And Eve and I, we have some history. We already had, I think it was 5 years ago, we had a couple of roundtable discussions with colleagues of ours, Tom Montag, James Bartley, Laura Leon, and others. One was on the love bite topic, that's just emphasis on your work, and also on hyperdimensional interferences and how to and the keys to discernment. So those were two 3-hour panel discussions that we had. Were very, very good. I think you posted on them on your website. They're posted on my website and YouTube channel, so people can check them out. But today we want to dive deeper into what you've been up to, your current work, how it ties into the bigger picture and the work we are doing and all that. And I just want to introduce people who are new to your work, just to share a little bit of your bio. Eve Lorgen is a dedicated counseling and hypnotherapy professional, author, anomalous trauma researcher, hatha yogi, and Taoist Qigong practitioner. She began her pioneering work with alien abductees, MILABs, and mind control victims while earning her master's degrees in counseling psychology in 1992. She also holds a bachelor in biochemistry and worked in the biotechnology industry for 7 years. Eve started a support group in 1994 in San Diego County, California, for experiences of anomalous trauma, and continues to consult with anomalous trauma clients worldwide while living in Western North Carolina. She was close associate of the late Barbara Bartholick and is dedicated in continuing expanding the work of the late Dr. Carla Turner. Anomalous trauma is defined as traumatic events that are out of the normal range of human experience. These experiences may include alien abductions, near-death experiences, shamanic initiations, military abductions, MILABs, mind control, spiritual warfare, demonic and psychic attacks, cult involvement, and narcissistic abuse. Early on in her career counseling alien abductees, she discovered a plethora of unusual experiences that often accompanied those who reported alien encounters and MILABs. The most prominent aspect of Eve's counseling and support is with those who are experiencing some form of alien or paranormal orchestrated love relationship issues, of what she calls the love bite or the dark side of Cupid, which I've also talked about and shared my experiences and all of that. Well, welcome to the show, Eve. Glad to have you on again.
I'm glad to be here, and it's always fun to do updates with you guys, because I know you keep up with all kinds of reports that are coming in where I think people are becoming more and more aware of the anomalous things that are happening in their personal lives. And I think they're stumbling across it actually in a lot of the alternative healing in communities, as well as, we used to kind of broadly base New Age, but they're not all bad. It's just that there's things that are happening that don't necessarily fall into the categories of what we grew up with. Even when I got my master's degree in counseling psychology, they didn't, post PTSD was, recognized, but they barely recognized like a DID or MPD personality disorders. And so now, years later, I think there's a lot more known about MPD, dissociative identity disorder, mind control, and trauma that causes those kinds of personality disorders. But now there's much more about what I call the narcissistic abuse and recovery movement that, thank goodness, I learned when I did. And I didn't really start learning until probably the late 2000s, when I came across Sam Backman's work, and who was a self-professed narcissist, and then learning about the effects of narcissistic abuse. And that seemed to kind of seal the final nail in the coffin in terms of finally realizing why certain healing modalities were and were not working. And it took an understanding of narcissistic abuse and really to get deeper into some of the effectiveness of trauma healing. And this also connected with my work with alien abduction traumas and the encounters they had, and then the love obsessions and the relationship orchestrations, manipulations, and interferences that occurred with, quote, alien abductees and people who had those kinds of histories. But as we did those panels years ago, 5 years ago now, this has expanded into a deepening understanding of the hyperdimensional interference of relationships, mostly love relationships, but could be any kind, where we can start to recognize when that's happening, how it's happening, and how to heal from it, and how not to be victimized by it, so that we can
Mm-hmm.
go around that pit in the road, so to speak. And so this continues to be reported to me in numbers, but I think most of them don't necessarily consider themselves, let's say, alien abductees or have that kind of history, but they may recognize that they might have had a dream about a UFO or a ET or an alien, or it was a twin flame thing that happened after, being in contact with a certain guru, and then all these weird things happened.
Mm-hmm.
So it just kind of opened up a whole can of worms, really, with understanding how this connects with a hyperdimensional and even an alien interference in human affairs, and how we need to recognize psychology maybe even differently, even in terms of, let's say, a DSM diagnosis category. I think there should be a new one for something like alien love bite or a dark side of Cupid manipulated relationship, where there's, the paranormal, supernatural, and the deliberate targeting mind control strategies to narcissistically abuse more severely, in many cases, these people. So that's what I'm coming across, is that I have to learn, effective trauma resolution, but understanding it from the supernatural, paranormal, and even targeting technologies. And how can we deal with this when we really don't have as many tools as we would like to help people?
Yeah, and I think it is great that trauma and narcissistic abuse has become a part of like mainstream conversation. It certainly wasn't the case 5 years ago. Yet at the same time, I think there's a limitation there as well. And our understanding of how trauma can be influenced by these hidden forces is like, there's no understanding or recognition of the spiritual dimension of it. So how would you say too, what would be the key difference between someone who's dealing with regular relationship issues based on their childhood conditioning and when there's a presence of a more sinister occult force present? Like what's the difference? Because we have a lot of people now who find out about the love bite and they're like, oh my God, I'm in a love bite relationship, when it could have just been their childhood wounding that they didn't heal. And then they want to just also, again, like move into like blame instead of just looking at it more practically.
Exactly.
Yeah. And it's, in reality, well, our lives are a mixed jumble of a lot of different things. It's not always cut and dry, but in the original definition of the quote alien love bite, it actually originated with Barbara Bartholock's observation, more defined towards love obsessions and sometimes sexual manipulations by these alien beings who would abduct people who had multiple encounters. And then they would literally orchestrate and set them up and manipulate their bioenergies, sexual energy, emotional energies, in whatever way to set them up with a targeted partner. And then it would play out in a certain syndrome where one person would have the primary love obsession. Sometimes the targeted other partner would have an immediate obsession, but then would be switched off after the alien abducted them and actually instructed them and switched them off, so that the other person was pining away in unrequited love, where it was as if it was a loose feeding operation. So that was the more clinically defined alien love bite, where there was many case histories where, okay, they had multiple abduction histories. They saw the aliens, they saw the craft. There might have been some witnesses, they saw certain kinds of beings that would appear in their room during an abduction, or they would have joint encounters with people and then later have a love obsession later with the one that they were abducted with, that they met later. It was like a real person. So the dark side of Cupid, I would say, is similar in that there is some kind of what I call a third party entity, like a ghost, a demon, a ET, astral figure, or even a ascended master, pretending to be a lover kind of thing. And that would be directing a love obsession, either astrally or behind a figure. Sometimes it's a celebrity figure or a popular guru teacher, or maybe just, somebody they think is their twin flame or their soulmate. And then that person might be hosted by one of these entities that are loose vampire feeders, like reptilians, Dracos, or certain types of beings. They may have many forms. So that's more of a dark side of Cupid, where it's definitely witnessed. There is a entity being witnessed somewhere, and there might be a history of mind control, abduction, or attached entities in one or both partners So there's a way that I do like kind of like an intake interview where I find out different aspects of their lives to see where the connections could come in, where the entities could come in. For example, one of the primary ways that they could come in, I believe now after looking at this, is if there is you can call it from a Christian perspective, a type of, there's a property possession in certain generational curses where blood oaths were done by one's ancestors or parents, grandparents, whatever. And it could be, a black magic thing, or it could be, a Freemason organization where there was a blood oath or some kind of vow taken to a spiritual organization, egregore or entity or Lucifer. And then those lines have, they lay claim over those bloodlines and the downline of those people who made the blood oaths. So until one, let's say, wakes up and you say, no, I no longer want to be under the authority of this particular bloodline curse, I therefore break it and bind it in the name and power of Jesus Christ, or whatever form that really works for you. I can't say that's the only thing, but it tends to be the most powerful that I've found to just really nip it in the bud, as long as you abide by the parameters of living a certain way, which was like a follower of Jesus Christ. This is how you live, with compassion, and you do good and you stop lying and da-da-da-da. So those people might have a higher propensity to get caught up in a dark cupid or even an alien love bite based on the access point that made them more opportunistic targets.
Yeah. And those contracts can even happen in past lives, which gets even trickier because most people do not have any recollection of such, where they made an agreement to a being. Maybe they dabbled in black magic or the occult in past lifetimes, and they made an agreement, and now it's carried over in this lifetime where that being has the permission to take over their body as well.
Yeah, it's a classical agreement of entrapment, right?
Yes, yes.
Talking about.
Yeah. I definitely had that reported with, reptilians, and where they were in another life, or that's what they claimed. And you always have to wonder, like, some beings will lie to you in order to justify their existence, to make you believe and accept them. So we always have to, is this my true realization, and not like, let's say, what a psychic told me.
Yes.
So we always, when we're intent on really wanting to discover the truth, I think it's revealed when you're ready, and then you'll know, like, when to let go of something. And but that definitely happens. Like, even in the early alien abduction literature that Barbara Bartholick had brought up, and Dr. Carla Turner, was that many times the beings that were involved in abductions were observed in near-death experiences, let's say earlier in that current lifetime or in other lifetimes, so that they were observed at other points in that person's existence that seemed to prove that they're not just there for that one lifetime, that they could be interacting, former lives or near-death experiences as well.
So there's this one aspect we know, this, like the, almost these occult hostile forces, these negative entities, they need to quote unquote respect free will. They need our consent to come in, right? It can be manipulated consent, some of trap of agreement, or even out of naivety, new age type people trying to, make contact with other beings, getting the Faustian pact with the devil, trying to, that kind of thing. Engaging in black magic without knowing that they're actually engaging in black magic, so to speak, and then imposter entities, good guys or the bad guys appearing as good guys and all of that. So there's that entry point, and as Laura said, and you confirmed, that can happen over generations, over lifetimes, literally, right?
Yes.
So what I'm interested in, because in my work, I talk about it, and we also, what I really appreciate about your work, you're really deep into the anomalous, hyperdimensional, occult, kind of like alien topic, the paranormal. And I also want to point this out, what you make clear, the classic Love by the Dark Side of Cupid has to have a strong paranormal component to that.
Yes.
And I've seen, since this topic has become more popular, it's great, but many people I've seen it abuse it, to justify, to use it as a like scapegoat, when they're actually dealing with quote unquote basic relationship trauma and stuff, and shadow projections and all of that.
Yes.
And what I really like about your work in general, because you're also, one of the very original who brought this all to popularity, so to speak. But even your work has, and I'm sure it's, has been distorted in many different ways. But you really have evolved, as you shared at the beginning, to the importance of trauma work, of healing our wounds, childhood wounds, trauma, that because these are the entry points. I've seen this as well, the work within myself and with others. And even the course Laura and I are hosting, Embodied Soul Awakening, we have a module where we really show the importance of the inner work, shadow work, right? Trauma work, childhood wounding, all of that. And especially nowadays, there are great modalities. We talked about this before the call, like new somatic trauma modalities to heal the entry point, right?
Yes.
Then you can see it also we bring the other topic, the occult topic, entities, but make clear that we need to heal the entry point. And it's not just about trying to go to an exorcist and get rid of the
energy
entity
worker who can eliminate entities.
Take out the cords and just clear me, you know what I mean?
Yes.
There's deeper work needed, right? So what is your experience with that?
Yeah, it's a learning experience too. And I would have to say that even as I learned things, I thought there might be easier ways to deal with it. And then I had to learn that, it's a longer path in terms of really going deep into our own psychological wounds and trauma and taking responsibility where we can, and not necessarily blaming or thinking one, teacher, guru, exorcist, shaman will be able to heal us all of some attachment or a curse, even though it can be helpful. But I've found that there are certain personality types who, it's just the way human nature is, where we want to blame someone and then they will run from, I actually run across this a lot, where they run across from, one psychic or one shaman or one healer to the next. Sometimes it's because they're looking for their soulmate or their twin flame. And I've had reports where there's many people, out there presenting themselves as these kind of like a matchmaker for their twin flame, where they do some kind of special meditation in this syrupy, sweet, wonderful, twin flame. And then they'll do these meditation rituals in the astral. And then they'll bring them in, open up portals, and a freaking reptilian comes in. It's a hosted person who's like they're flame, and they're hosted by a drac. And I have people who were direct witnesses to knowing the connections between, that particular facilitator who was really doing a type of magic, thinking it was a type of, harmless invocation, and bringing in your twin flame when we were actually doing a form of magic and opening up portals to bring these beings in that were already hosting or had some kind of maybe agreement with another person, where they would be matched together with that targeted partner, twin flame, but they're already being hosted by the demon that came in. So the drac or whoever it was. So, and they're playing this game that they really are the twin flame. And then when this plays out and they start connecting with the person and observing the dreams that happen, the astral connections and the weird stuff and the emotional highs, crashing lows, and the classic it's kind of like the narcissistic game of emotional pulling your strings, the ups and the downs and the dramas and the traumas and the gaslighting. And it's so interesting how in the ones that are hosted by, let's say, a loose feeding entity, like, let's say, a reptilian or a drac or even a demon or anything that tends to feed on energy and attention, will play out as a narcissistic abuse type of relationship, whether it's covert, overt, borderline, or addictive compulsive in some way, where they just keep you in this trauma drama business. And it's very common. It's just like a signature dynamic. That happens a lot, and getting unglued from that. And there is a bliss that will happen with the astral twin flame thing, because these beings know how to access those sexual energy points. And sometimes they'll put in, implants in, certain areas of the energy body, the sexual root chakra, whatever. And then they will activate it so that it gets more activated during sexual arousal or masturbation or whatever they're doing with this love by partner or twin flame or whatever.
Yeah. And so why do you think, I'm just curious, because I've noticed a pattern of people who come to me or just on the spiritual path. It's almost like this narcissistic abusive relationship is also a type of initiation. So what is it about, like, I don't know if you've noticed this yourself, but like, why is it so common with people who are kind of on the spiritual path to fall into these kinds of dynamics?
Oh, well, I'd say it's a type of targeting, because I've seen this even in people in the Christian communities. Although I've seen this it was in The Dark Side of Cupid, where let's say one woman who she had a love bite set up, and it was a classic, trauma, drama, gaslighting, the whole thing. And then her work environment was actually a research targeting company, kind of like taken over by Satanists who had this technology, and they were like setting her up. And so once she caught on to what was going on and she confronted the guy, like broke up with him, then a whole slew of other men just suddenly entered her lives as if they were orchestrated to come in to fill the spot of the love bite that didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
They were still being manipulated from another source that was hyperdimensional and possibly technology with like a group of Satanists, actually, in that particular case. But then I've seen other cases where it was a really good Christian person who's like has a powerful Holy Spirit gift in them. And then because they are really, working to reveal what the Holy Spirit is telling them, and they're maybe starting on a teaching path, something happens in their life that's just like a horrible, devastating thing. And then these men are sent in, like, let's say dating after a breakup with another one. And then the ones sent in it's like they're being tested because they're basically hosted by the wrong energies. Yes. So they would set in their path to actually offset their destiny of working maybe more powerfully as a healer, as a teacher, as a minister, whatever. So it's a targeting type of thing that could happen. And I suppose some people could look at it as a spiritual initiation, where I've had this reported even in the alien abduction literature, where the aliens would, put them together and such, and then these two married couples who have an obsession, let's say, with each other, but they're married to other partners, and they go to a conference and they have this temptation to have an affair, and it's love bite, where they're really amping their sexual energies and everything, but then they don't bite, they don't get together, they don't have an affair, and then the aliens visiting them later saying, "Oh, congratulations, you passed the test," But I just think that's a con job. I think that's just to make them believe that the aliens are good, and that keep them on this dangling carrot that the alien handlers are really good, and they really are testing them for their spiritual evolution or something.
Yeah.
So can I just say something that, because it reminds me, like when I was in India doing my yoga teacher training, I was feeling amazing high states of consciousness. And there was a point when there was this predatorial energy coming through the form of just random guys, like kind of just trying to harass me in India, which is very interesting. Like, I would go to a restaurant and sit down. A guy would sit in front of me and wouldn't leave and would just keep harassing me or follow me down the street. And this is when I felt at my best. And that's when I realized there's almost a correlation with when you're anchoring a high amount of life force and these predatorial energies come through. And I think the main thing too is also on a basic trauma perspective is getting into touch with a right relationship with your own sexual energy. Because if you have wounds and traumas that are unhealed, it's so much easier to manipulate your sexual energy as well.
Yeah. I wanted to add on that there. Thank you. That's very important, because there's a targeting aspect, right? Also, people on the verge of an awakening, right? Or people who are helping serve others, speaking truth. I can see it in my own life, even my own Dark Side of Cupid experience I've written about extensively, almost 8-9 years ago, was definitely targeted. It nearly took me down. I was almost going to delete my work, got suicidal thoughts and depression. I was very confused emotionally, psychologically. But as Laura mentioned, it was in a sense an initiation. I could have gone two ways. I could have gone completely into the blame track, that, taking it personal, not understanding what has been working through the person, first of all, and then blaming her or just entities and whatnot. But it forced me really to take responsibility for my own stuff. Because what I realized that person, which also was manifested in this narcissistic personality or borderline type personality, as you mentioned, right? That's kind of how these interference manifest. But it was also getting into my own wounds, which were still unconscious back then. My own narcissistic wounding. You understand, I'm sure you know the concept of narcissistic wounding, of being raised by some parent who has narcissistic tendencies and whatnot. Yeah. So you become more codependent. and attract narcissistic personality. And I didn't even know I was codependent. That happened, as I started working on myself. So a therapist, oh my God, all these issues came up, glaring in my face. So that was my initiation. And I had to then really do deep inner work, inner child work, trauma work to take responsibility, because it was clear that these were the entry points where they, get in. So yes, there's a correlation between being targeted, but they can only come in if there's something within you that responds to that. So if you can then engage in this deeper work, that's, I felt, the initiation, the outcome, the story of the wounded healer, or really like a rite of passage in a sense, if you can use it as a teaching function.
Yeah, sorry, I just want to add on to that. And looking back, the reason why this kind of predatorial energy was targeting me is because I actually didn't have the ability to say no and make boundaries as well. So that was like my weak spot. I was feeling really good, and it was, I would tell them to go away, but I didn't have that kind of firmness in my energy. And I can see how that's also what Peter Levine talks about in trauma work. You need to awaken the tiger. You need to awaken your ability to get angry, to make boundaries, to say no. And that's why that trauma piece is so important. Yeah.
So what is your experience over the years? Like, how do you use trauma therapy, and what kind to work with the people who are dealing with anomalous trauma, but bringing it down to a more practical approach with more somatic type of trauma work, I would suppose?
Yeah, it's only been, what I would say, recently. I've done things where I really work with people from a compassionate listening, helping them understand. But sometimes trauma is so deep that that's not working for them, or they're not ready to do the work, or to let go of the blame, or to take the step in doing the deeper work. And the deeper work can be the somatic part, which I think definitely you need to go that deep because of the I see that the attachment trauma origin, which usually is a pre-verbal, like infant to 2 years old type of trauma, which is, if you can get that deep, then you can deal with the interpersonal styles and repetitive things that keep happening. But you have to go really, really deep to find it. And that's usually some kind of body sensory thing. So in order to go deep enough, we have to get out of what I call the complex PTSD, which is what really happens when you have pervasive long-term trauma from childhood. Then you have to recognize how you respond in terms of your primary trauma response, which would be the fight, flight, freeze, fawn.
Yes.
And primary personality style, which, some people clearly have a personality disorder from a DSM perspective, like the narcissist, the borderline, the sociopath. But usually the narcissists and the sociopaths won't come to therapy unless they're forced, usually by a marriage partner.
Yeah.
So borderlines will come in, and borderlines tend to be so distorted and blaming and emotionally dysregulated that they have a hard time working deeply on their own without blaming and going into trauma dramas and expecting you to do all the miracles, and then turning around and bad-mouthing you for not basically doing, an exorcism on all their problems. When they're still doing everything that causes all the attachments, right?
Yes.
So it's like, okay, if they're going to be porn addicted, and alcoholic and messing with people lives and burning bridges and relationships, and then expect you to pull off their entities. It's like, are you kidding me? You know what I mean? So
exactly.
Those kind of things are unrealistic expectations. So
yes,
you're right about going deep. So,
but you know what? On that note, so you made a very important point, which I also found out. You need to be in a certain state of being, or some sort of quote unquote healthy state of mind, to be able to engage in trauma work. First of all, like you just mentioned, right? Sort of people are not really.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Someone who has traits of borderline personality are obviously the hardest cases to work with, even for professional therapists, right? Because the amount of transference and countertransference that goes on as well.
Yeah.
And then it also comes down to the intention of the individual is, do they really want to get better? Do they really want this as well? And I think that it's very easy to, especially when you're working in any sort of healing, helping professions, that they want to make you their mom or their dad and to come and fix everything, right? And that's a tricky thing to navigate, is like that you as a therapist also have to be aware when that's happening and being able to help lead the person back to a more empowering state. And there are certain therapists who will also capitalize on that, because then they're like, okay, I'm your savior, and they feel good about themselves too, right? So that's a whole other rabbit hole. But I also think that, this compassion is a really big piece as well. And just being able to witness the person in their story. And, especially with the topics you're dealing about, I guarantee you, if they went to another therapist, they would also tell them that they were psychotic or having delusions or something, or lead them back to that answer. So even just to be validated in their experience is also really huge.
Yeah.
So what were you going to say, honey?
No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's why many are unable to get well. And we see this in a lot of what we call the cult abuse,
Yes.
SRS abuse families where, it's set up so that they could never escape or get well because they're not believed, because the systems themselves of the, psychological association, medical association, academia, religion, is controlled by the ones who control the narratives, who are controlling these families. And so just to be believed is a big step in being able to have enough of your human needs met to actually go the path, because sometimes it's not safe to do the trauma, like facing the trauma. And that's what Peter Levine is really good about explaining. And I just enjoyed his videos. I've been just consuming them lately. And one of the things that he mentioned that I would agree is it's like the myth of Medusa, where you can't look at that Medusa directly or they would freeze.
Yes.
Stone. And it's like the trauma, sometimes you can't go at it directly. It's too strong.
Yes.
The mobility, fear response or the fight response takes over, and then it immobilizes you so that you just get traumatized over and over again. Don't do that. And that's why a lot of people don't want to do hypnotic regressions, because they'll feel like they'll just get traumatized over again. So you have to kind of go around it in such a way that we pull up the inner resources, but also, like you said, it has to be the deep somatic, primal instinctual responses must come up from the person. And that's what makes the connection of power to make a transformation possible.
Yes.
So that's why it's hard to do, because many people are actually chronically dissociated. They don't even know it.
Yeah,
exactly.
They can't get well if they're dissociated, and they can't actually tap into spiritual power like maybe they think they do in channeling or meditation, and they're chronically dissociated. So you really deep enough in the body and in the instinct to pull up the resources to gradually face the trauma small bit by small bit, to basically reframe, and you build new good feelings to build a new foundation of completely new beliefs and feelings that restructure how you even view yourself in reality.
Yeah. Exactly. Maybe that's also why he's really big on just focusing on the felt sense, because
Peter
somehow,
Levine, right?
Peter Levine's work, because in a way, that can also bypass the emotional and identification we have around it. It's like, okay, what's happening when you're with your chest when you're feeling that way? Is it clenching? Is it opening? And it also is interesting too, because I went through this on my path when I was getting really into Vipassana. And nothing bad about Vipassana. I had great experiences, but I was using it to spiritually bypass my trauma. And I was getting disassociated and thinking that I felt better, but then I was becoming dependent on meditation in order to feel that way. And then when I got back into my body or something got triggered, all the trauma came to surface. So it's very interesting too, because I think about this a lot, how, they have these kind of ancient spiritual, the Hindu sages were all about like, you are not the body, and just identify with the self and everything will be okay. But as Westerners, it's almost like we actually need to develop a better relationship with our body in order to actually access that self. We're like almost skipping a step and just trying to disassociate when we're already disassociated. So I just like to hear your thoughts on that, because how these spiritual concepts can easily be used for spiritual bypassing if they're taken even at the wrong time or the wrong point in the journey.
Oh gosh. I realized this in my own walk, although I think meditation is beneficial for calming and focusing, but I know that it does help dissociate. And what I find almost disturbing really now when I look at it is like our whole concept of spirituality and spiritual power and embodiment has been distorted by religions and certain practices, which is actually facilitating dissociation and bypassing in a way that it's actually taking away our spiritual power and deluding us into thinking maybe we are more spiritual when in reality we're being hijacked. I say sometimes this hijacking takes place interdimensionally. So we do have to get back in our bodies. And I've experienced the same thing as you, Laura, where, I thought that the meditation was helping, and it did help. But once I got more aware, it actually brought a lucidity of awareness that was so shocking to be back in my body and to actually feeling the absolute rage of injustice of being narcissistic and abused for years and years and years that I could barely contain. It was like all the rage came up at once, and all the awareness of the insanity was almost too hard to handle. And I had to go back into complacency just to manage the feelings of the insanity of being in a relationship with a narcissist.
Yeah.
So,
and that's also the sign that you're getting out of the freeze state as well. Peter Levine talks about, abuse survivors. They often feel this intense rage when they get back into their instincts, basically. Just fascinating, because then again, in spiritual teachings, they're like, don't be angry, ahimsa, nonviolence, but that's actually such a crucial step in getting back into our, human instincts and our humanity, or actually our animal instincts as well. So you guys
No, I can relate to that. I mean, like, you had to hit the nail on the head, Eve, about, I always say all of us are traumatized to varying degrees. Trauma literally meaning just wounded. People don't understand when they hear trauma, they think, it's a big T trauma, like right away, physical, the
rape,
big events, rape, sexual
disaster,
abuse, whatnot.
War.
But we all have developmental trauma to varying degrees, and we live in a society where literally pathology is normalized. So we're constantly getting traumatized, gaslit even now. We live already in a very head-centric place all the time, so we're dissociated by nature, and just we have so much locked out. And I can relate to that. I've used to be very head-centric, and I'm finding good. And like, the more I work on myself, even now after 25 years of doing inner work, it still comes down to the basics, right? I still have to work on my little triggers and stay in body and just work through it and allow myself to feel it in all of that, rather than using spiritual concepts or even other concepts, kind of to bypass the process. I think I'm sure you have experience in your work. There's, as I like to say, the psyche has its own timetable of healing. We cannot force things. We cannot push. There's a journey to that, right?
Yes. And we also need to be in a safe enough environment to even start exploring our trauma. Like, some people want to work on healing their trauma, but they're still in the abusive relationship. And it's like, you actually need to get yourself in a place of physical safety before that the psychosomatic body will open up.
I mean, I noticed that too with people who this happens a lot with those who, let's say, they were in a secret space program, or they believe that they were abducted, and they want a hypnotic regression just to find out what happened. They want the information about the experience, because they have these large blocks of missing time, and it's almost as if it's a compulsion to retrieve an identity back, and to get the information and the mental satisfaction of the identity that was stolen from you in the time. But in reality, you can't do that with like a simple few hypnotic regressions. You really have to not only have the safety, but our brain actually switches off the ability for memory and even feelings to come up when the conditions aren't met for a safe trauma resolution and safe healing. And this is where a certain energy dynamic model that I'm learning and doing with another colleague out of the UK named Jennifer Foster. She has a fantastic way. She just kind of created this model based on her own observation of what really works for clients. And the energy dynamic model it's almost Taoist in its way of understanding humans. But the long story short, many people were unable to get to the true healing of basically the bottom line is to be able to grieve the losses and the pain and whatever those traumas are. Then we hold those dark energies, and then we separate from it by jumping into the mental zone, which would be a form of dissociation, but staying more in this mental way of living instead of the being feeling. And then connecting with spirit. You can call it spirit, mind, body. And that's not happening in people who are dissociated or who are all in the mental realm. So many people in the Western world, we're all into the mental world or spiritual bypassing narratives, which keep us dissociated on purpose. And I'd say that now when I look at it, I'm saying there's something wrong with this. This has been hijacked on purpose to keep us from being embodied and empowered and creating reality and recognizing the loose feeding operation that's going on with entrapping our souls in this recyclement process. I know I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, but if we could be in the feeling zone and really do the grief work and then have what we need to get there, which goes back to the safety, the foundation of safety, but it's as if there is a energy reservoir inside of us that needs to be filled up to a certain degree to enable the process even to take place. So this is what I realized what was happening with people who had histories, much like my own, where, I was abused all life long. I didn't know what not abuse is, right? So I never even had the existing energy foundation to even deal with the trauma or get the memories back, because you're going to stay in amnesia until you build that energy level. So and that comes through basic animal, she calls it the animal power needs in the energy dynamic model. There's like the animal power needs, the human, the personality, and the ability. And so the most important ones really, and it goes back to what was kind of described in the Maslow's hierarchy of needs and I don't know if that's, Abraham Maslow, but this is actually more specific, and I believe it's more practical in our everyday life and applying it and understanding how it works. That we have to have, basic loving kindness and care. Oh my God, what's that, right? Safety and freedom from physical pain. And then trying to find out where you're having energy leaks. Because if you have energy leaks through loose vampirism, you can't build up your energy level and your foundation enough to even allow the grieving process to take place, to even allow the spiritual power to come in and connect you to the ground so you can be fully embodied. So learning this model was like an aha moment for me, because it explained like I knew all about this stuff, right? Like all the models and, like being academic and brainy, right? It wasn't working in my life. Like I was stuck and I was stuck because the foundational energy of loving kindness and safety and freedom from pain, I didn't have enough energy to even grieve. And with a chronic freeze response, as well as you're basically vampirized or trapped, stuck energy that can't be released because the conditions are not correct for that to take place. So the whole thing with healing now is like, we want to create those conditions so that that process can even happen, actually, even on a more natural level. So it doesn't become a real scary thing of facing the trauma head on and having all this PTSD and like friggin' trigger crap. And, like that's what happens with people who've had like alien abduction histories, or if you've had a secret space program, MK Ultra thing, and you don't know it. And then you watch an interview, for example. I mean, this happened to me, right? I was watching a secret space program person called Johann Fritz. And he's like one of the most lucid people that I've heard in this community of people who are speaking out about their experiences of being in some kind of secret, unacknowledged program that's secret space, whatever. But I got so triggered from listening to several of his interviews. And I thought, okay, I'm done. I mean, I hear this over and over again, it's, no big deal. But that triggered me. And then I knew if something still triggers you and you have a reaction, something's there.
Yes.
And that the conditions in order for that healing and that awareness and that grieving, whatever needs to take place, those conditions have not been met yet. We need to find out how to meet those conditions with those, what I call the basic animal power needs, your human power needs, love, safety, kindness, freedom from physical pain, and being able to express yourself. So I create that for my clients. If we can come to understand how that works, we create these conditions and we build it in a real way, in the real world, in the here and now, in a practical way, then things just start falling into place more naturally. And that is it's a wonderful, magical process when it takes place. So that's what we've been doing lately.
Yeah, and the grief work is so huge, I
We just talked
even
about this the other day, right?
yeah, like, one of our neighbors lost her husband recently, and I was talking to her daughter, who's like this businesswoman who lives in this big city, and I could see how she was she just lost her father, and she was so armored up and so in her head, and it just made me realize again, like, we don't know how to grieve in this culture, we don't know how to, because we're so afraid of death too, and death, I think, can, even the grief process can be almost an expression of love. It's like love at the end of its life cycle. So it's really important that we do that work and create those conditions, and that basic sense of safety. I know for some spiritual seekers like myself, I was just moving around from place to place. I never knew where I was going to live in the next few months, And on a just physical animal level, like, our body won't relax enough to do that deeper emotional and spiritual healing and trauma healing because, our basic needs are not met. So we do have to look at those hierarchy of needs. Sometimes you want to like skip a step, but it is super important. And even, if people are moving around a lot and they apply for our programs, and don't know where they're going to live, I'm like, I don't know, like, you need to take care of your basic physical needs before you get into this work, because it's just not going to be as impactful,
There's a certain foundation. Yeah, that reminds me of the way we work. Also, this model you just described sounds very interesting, Eve. It reminds me of what we apply, what we call the fourfold approach of holistic self-work, integral, right? Work on all levels, the physical, emotional, psychological, and spiritual. So as we know, some people just only focus on the quote spiritual with all the distortions, spiritual bypassing, and it leaves room for more hijacking, interference, and dissociation, and all of that, and the illusion of waking up, basically. Right?
Oh, yes.
We know that, right? Then, on the other hand, what I wanted to get your input, because as we know, in your work and your experience, obviously, deep, basic psychological work, trauma work, somatic work, very important, shadow work as well.
Yes.
But I've also seen, especially with myself, like, I've done deep into the work, and it's very important. But if you do it just by itself, there's always more to dig in the mud. You always end up in childhood somehow,
Yeah.
So there's also the other aspect of the spiritual aspect, not to throw the baby with the bathwater, to connect to source, to essence, to the divine God, and I see many people who get into my work or your work of the hyperdimensional, there can be the fear of like, oh my God, I want to connect to God, but I don't want to call in something evil in. But at the same time, there's a way we need to connect to God, divine, however your, belief system may be, from the Christian perspective, the true Christian perspective. I work more like from the yogic perspective of the divine union, and bringing in the light as well, and how we can do this safely without kind of like falling into paranoia of getting another trap of agreement, right?
And just as a side note, that paranoia, that was an interesting thing, because I went to a 10-day retreat beginning last year, 2020. And what I discovered, because I was like day 4 of my meditation, and I was meditating with paranoia and like fear. Oh my God, people are against me. And then I realized, just feeling into my body, because my teacher is a somatic meditation teacher, that this was linked to like deep primal ancestral fear of not being safe, So when people are experiencing this paranoia, a lot of the time it's like really ancient fear, where they just, and it's almost like, and then automatically you think the world is out to get you too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's trauma, like the unresolved trauma, will cause that kind of paranoia and distorted view of, a lot of conspiracy theories, not that there aren't some that are actually true, but I've noticed that like some people, they're habitually falling into what we call the repetition compulsion of chaos, drama. They can't help it because their inner conflict of their stuff is so great. It's like it keeps manifesting, and they unconsciously do it, or sometimes they do it on purpose. And it's just that it's unresolved inside, but it creates paranoia, because I've had that before, where you don't know what to trust. And I think the reason why I like the energy model and just the simplicity of just like Peter Levine's work and the somatic experiencing is, it takes away like a paranoia that, you're going to have to worry about some demonic thing. You're just working with your body. You're just working with your feelings. You're just working with the simple stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that if there is an attachment, it tends to leave once our traumas are resolved, and we don't have a lot of deep conflictual fear. And it tends to, because it won't have anything to link into. It's kind of like when we're dealing with narcissistic abuse, one of the things to do if to not let them trigger you when they keep trying to pull you into their constant dramas and conflict and them having to be better, you having to be less. You basically, the gray rock.
Yeah.
Observe and absorb, but not absorb the feelings and the they always make you feel like shit, right? And they gaslight you. So if you can be boring to them and they won't have anything to hook on to, just like the demons. And it's like you become boring. And then the truth is, when you really do the real work, I don't know if you mentioned this, Bernhard, but when you get back into the simplicity of the somatic experiencing and the being, you can be content being boring.
Yes.
Or like getting into all this research and all this news and what's happening and and there's all this like crap going on. I mean, it is a lot of chaos ramping up, and it is interesting, and there's a lot of interesting things. But when you really get into the beingness of who you are in simplicity, it's actually a better, safer place to be. That's more rooted and grounded.
Yeah.
And then you become actually boring to the ones who keep wanting to like pull you in into their drama of what's the next chaos going on in this place, that place,
Yeah, that's what Changyan Trungpa talked about, that the importance of boredom on the spiritual path and being able to be bored, and just sit and do nothing. And you see, it's the opposite of how we're conditioned these days, where we're constantly hooked in, like it's like information extreme overload, and just being able to sit and do nothing and just like stare out the window or whatever, is actually, it's a very magical, like for me, that's when I feel most connected to like my true self. And that's when I feel most at peace. Although I have to say it wasn't always like that, because I think that what happens is, since we're so used to this information overload, people's minds are still going 100 miles a minute long after they've removed themselves from the information, and that again is also, the mind that's constantly on this narrative is also a trauma response in itself as well.
Yeah. That's, well, we could probably talk about that maybe in the second hour, is like how we can understand when we're being propelled into or actually pulled into the trauma drama. It's actually a large-scale narcissistic abuse. Keep us in trauma, keep us dissociated, keep us from being empowered, because that's part of an overall agenda.
Yes. Yes.
In some ways, you know.
Yeah, I think even we'll talk about that more in the second hour, but some, tips for people who've suffered over the past year, because the past year, I think for many of us has registered as a trauma, because
knowingly or unknowingly.
Yeah, right? Life has not been the same. It was a big one-off event. Actually, it's not a one-off; it's a continuous event now. And before that, I actually saw how a lot of people were out of body and traumatized. But now it's like kicked it up 10 times the amount. And you see that even more, even people walking around with masks and very out of body and checked out. So we can talk about that more in the second hour, because I think it is by design as well. Like it's almost like some occult force kind of entrapped us in trauma to release souls from their body, and then more entry points to enter and take over humanity as well.
Exactly. And I want to just add something what you said, Eve, about being boring. It reminds me also, from an occult level, like just the basic occult defense. I'm sure you're familiar with the book Psychic Self-Defense by Dion Fortune, classic, right? And she wrote in the book, whenever you're dealing with a panic-stricken friend or demon from the pit, I'm kind of paraphrasing, like she said, the best defense is never going out, to react in defense. Never go out and attack. You know what I mean? No, don't respond in like, so to speak, right? It is about, what I call the 0-point consciousness of non-reactive consciousness.
Yes.
Right? Not to give in, not give the luge what they want, which is easier said than done.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Especially if the trauma gets triggered.
Yeah.
A counselor where like part of being I would naturally be somewhat, and it was somewhat codependent. I realize now later that, people being willing to be a sounding board. But there's some who are actually habitually addicted to pulling you in for the sake of, it's a self-flagellating, loose, stealing operation because of their own personality style and choice to not really deal with their stuff, but instead use you. So that's where you kind of got to pull back and gray rock and not involve yourself. And so, you can lose a few friends, as they say, when you start, like, I don't want to play that game anymore. I mean,
yes.
Yeah. And I'm boring. Sorry.
Boundaries. No, I can't. They're very true. Well, excellent, Eve. So that finished in the second hour. Let's definitely want to go more into what Laura talked about, these entry points and the collective trauma we're going through, what's happening right now, and how this ties into the jab, the quote unquote vaccine, which is not really a vaccine in the traditional sense, and how that relates to, take over, luge, and like full on possession, and like the end game from a hyperdimensional alien perspective, what we're, the technocratic transhumanistic agenda. So let's dive into that into the second hour. And
the books, my books.
Yeah, exactly.
Now,
Just please go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to say they're both available through alibris.com as used books now. Mm-hmm. So now I finally have a seller that sells these, and because my publisher decided not to, and the other one basically sold out, and it was like a very, very high price. So now I just wanted to make sure that it's available now. So,
and your website too is just evelorgen.com, or?
Yeah, evelorgen.com, and then there's a Facebook Alien Love Bite group as well. And
you do one-on-one work currently with people too, right? You're open for sessions. Yeah. So if anyone's interested, they could go to your website. We'll put it in the
info section.
Section.
Yeah. Excellent. And again, for anybody who wants access to the second hour, if you're not already a member, go to my website, veilofreality.com, to subscribe, also to support our work. We appreciate it. You would have access to all the second hours of all podcasts, including the membership forum. And also, as of now, we still have some spots available in our course, right?
Yeah, an embodied soul awakening. So if you're a fan of group work, we have a really amazing group already. And we're working on the fourfold approach of holistic self-work. So we cover a lot of these topics, actually, that we spoke about.
In outer work, and it's limited to 25 people. So great. Eve, thank you so much, and we'll be right back.